ask that you take yourself off mute when you want to ask a question. John, I think, yes, I was just going to remind you to start recording, which is good. So this meeting will be recorded. So for those folks who weren't able to join us tonight, they'll have an opportunity to go on our website and listen to the presentation, as well as hear the important questions that are asked tonight. So with that introduction, I will turn it over to Richard Spees, who will walk us through how we got here.
Thanks, Chuck, and good evening,
Hold
everyone.
on,
John, you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Let's see if it
All
works.
right, well, while he's doing that, it's the only slide I'm using because I'm giving a very high-level description of where did we start, how did we get here, what all have we done, and what are we still doing down in Bennington. And I really do wish we were down there in person tonight. We always love coming down and having a beer when we're done and meeting with everyone, but situation is what it is. So as most of you know, there was a facility that was opened in 1969 on Northside Drive, and that operated for 9 years until 1978, when the company ChemFab outgrew that facility and moved to Water Street in North Bennington. They operated in North Bennington from 1978 until 2000, when they were purchased by Saint-Gobain Performance Plastics. And Saint-Gobain operated the facility for 2 years until 2002, when they moved that and they ceased operations in North Bennington and moved that work over to Merrimack, New Hampshire. So in February of 2016, after citizens from Bennington letting people know that this facility on Water Street was similar to some of the facilities over on Hoosick Falls, I was asked to come down and do some preliminary sampling to see if there were any contaminated water supplies around the plant. And so using ArcView and our consultant, we wrote up a plan, came down and sampled 5 private wells around the plant, and also the North Bennington municipal water supply up at the treatment plant up in Shaftesbury. A couple weeks later, we got the results of the sampling results, and lo and behold, all 5 wells that we sampled were contaminated. The public system was not, and we were off and running. So since then, we've sampled over 600 distinct wells, and it's actually approaching 700. And I always hesitate to give an exact number because it always changes. Even in the last month, we've gotten requests both inside our area of concern and around our area of concern for sampling. And the homes that are inside, we send the contractor down or have Saint-Gobain's contractor go over and sample that water supply. And the ones that are outside the area, we direct them to private labs who can help them and ask them to share their results with us to get even more information to make everyone feel more comfortable with the work that we're doing. Of the over 600 wells that were sampled, about 2/3 come back with some level of PFAS, mostly PFOA, in the water supply, and about half of them have come back above the drinking water standard. So for those homes that were above the standard, as you all know, we immediately had bottled water, first obviously at collection locations, but within a fairly short period of time, getting them delivered directly to your home. And we know there were some growing pains all the way along in that, but we'll work with you every time to try and make sure when you're eligible, we'll get it to you. And also Saint-Gobain volunteered, although we may have asked if they didn't, to put treatment systems, the point of entry treatment systems that most of you know about, on your water supplies to make sure the water coming into your home was clean, and then sample it according to a approved sampling plan to continue to show that the water coming in is good, is potable. So what's everything we sampled in Bennington? I mean, it's kind of a high level. I'm not going to go through the results of everyone, but we've sampled, as I said, greater than 600 drinking water wells. We did a detailed soil sampling plan on site and around the Water Street facility in order to see what levels were deposited on those soils and if there was a direct contact risk. Fortunately, there wasn't. We sampled springs and surface water, sediments and fish, maple syrup and milk and blood. And then as part of our full investigation to ensure that we could determine that Saint-Gobain was responsible. Of course, they were trying to show that perhaps they weren't responsible for all the contamination. They installed over 50 borings around North Bennington and into Shaftesbury and a few of them south of Route 9 in order to complete their conceptual site model. And as part of that work, we had our contractor checking and doing some duplicate sampling. And that came back very, very well. We did a lot of evaluation around the landfill because there was discussion about the old Bennington landfill being a potential source. We did air modeling to, again, refine to make sure that we understood a little bit about how the contaminants were coming out the stack and depositing on the soils that were then contaminating your groundwater, the reason that we're here. And we did background soil sampling because there was a lot of discussion about, is this different than anything else around Vermont? And of course, that showed that it was. We also had Saint-Gobain, their contractor, completed an evaluation of, is there any way to more quickly remediate this? We call that an evaluation of corrective action alternatives. And one of the things they evaluated were installing wells and pumping groundwater in order to try and recover contaminated groundwater and clean up the site more quickly. There are obviously some problems with that. If we dewater the aquifer, anyone who had a well in it, it might not work, but we had that evaluation done. We also evaluated pumping abandoned wells or even the active wells that people were using to see, again, if we could clean up the groundwater any more quickly. And unfortunately, given the physics of how contaminants come out of soils and get into groundwater, really the conclusion was that, even if we pumped millions, hundreds of millions of gallons of groundwater, it wouldn't shorten the duration of groundwater contamination under Bennington by any appreciable amount. I think the difference was maybe 1 year if it was a 50-year effort. And so that didn't seem to make a lot of sense. And so we settled. The other thing they evaluated was, well, what if we just monitor it and watch it flush through the soil and into the water table, and then out of the water table, obviously, into the rivers. And that is what we settled on. And as part of that, that M&A process, when we have groundwater that's going to be contaminated for a long time, our rule and the groundwater rule says that you need to reclassify that groundwater in order to leave it contaminated for a long period of time. So some of the other corrective actions, as most of you know, that was the corrective action of the groundwater, but what about the impacts to people's homes? Well, we landed very strongly on, for people who wanted it, connecting them to municipal water. We had clean sampling results from both Bennington and North Bennington, and where that made sense, that was the preferred alternative for the agency and for most of the homeowners that we spoke with. So what we did in response to that was in early of 2016, probably just 6 months into this incident, there were 13 homes and businesses in Bennington and North Bennington that were identified to be located right along municipal water lines. We asked Saint-Gobain to connect homeowners to that municipal water, and they were hesitant. They wanted more information, and they wanted to complete their investigations to ensure that they were indeed responsible for the contamination. And that's a fair approach, but we didn't want to wait. We thought that was what we call, excuse me for those who connected that way, but low-hanging fruit. It was cheaper, quicker, and the homeowners and business owners would be much happier having clean municipal potable water than having long-term point of entry treatment systems. And so we just connected them. Then around 2018, in agreement with Saint-Gobain, they agreed to connect all the homes on the west side, what we call operational unit A, to municipal water. All the ones where they could design it in, water supply agreed, the village of North Bennington agreed, and where it made sense. So that was over 230 homes were eligible, and of those 225 connected to municipal water. As part of that agreement, we also recovered all the funds that we expended for all the work that we did along the way. And then in 2020, I think it was 2020, it might have been late 2019, we settled with Saint-Gobain in operational unit B, which is the east side of Bennington, or the right side of this map. And there, 148 residences decided to connect to municipal water. And that work just finished up in the last couple of months. And there's only very minimal work left to be done under those contracts. And also, as part of that in 2021 and the settlement agreement, we also agreed to work on connecting homes in operational unit C, which is the furthest east locations along East Road and Chapel Road. And that work began in 2021, but unfortunately won't be completed until spring or summer of 2022. And that looks like about 80 residences that are going to be eligible or connecting to municipal water there.
Hey,
So
hey,
for place,
Richard, can I
yeah.
correct you on one thing? Is OUC should be done this year, because they already started in
Oh,
OUC.
yeah,
So
you're correct. This is 2021. I knew
yes,
it was later this year, but
I just wanted to
got
make sure to
got my notes
clarify
right.
that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, that's fine. Thank you. I appreciate that. So for those homes that weren't connected to municipal water for a variety of reasons, could be water quality. When water sits in a pipe too long, the water quality is not good. It could be pressure. There were a lot of pressure issues with certain runs. It could be the length of the run could be cost prohibitive, which makes it difficult for us to settle. There's a variety of reasons. But there were some homes that couldn't connect, but we didn't want to give up on that. We didn't want to go with permanent treatment systems for years or decades to come. So where it made sense, we proposed and pushed, and Saint-Gobain agreed to investigate putting in replacement wells. And of those, there were 13 wells on the west side that were identified. 6 of those have already been done, and a couple more are scheduled for the next couple of months. And that's proven pretty successful. And again, that's courtesy of the work done by the Vermont Geological Society and our sampling and just understanding the nature of the wells, that there's a lot of deeper aquifers that have old groundwater in it that's clean, and those are the systems that we're tapping into. And then there are 20 wells on the east side, and we've just begun that evaluation. There was a questionnaire sent out recently to homeowners there to get that work initiated. And then unfortunately, there are a few cases where it just doesn't make sense. You can't either get clean water or they can't really connect to municipal water. And therefore, we'll be looking at long-term point of entry treatment systems. Sampling to ensure that those systems continue to work is ongoing. And there's a whole plan in the agreement on how those systems finally come off. The last thing would be the long-term work that's going on. As we've mentioned before, we continue to sample all of the wells that are below treatment levels or well replacement levels or waterline connection that are around the periphery of the area of concern. Currently, we're doing that twice a year. And I'm sure eventually, as we get more and more data and we feel more and more confident, that duration that frequency may decrease. But we'll evaluate that as that information comes in and gets evaluated. And then last, where water lines were installed, we continue to sample groundwater in 12 to 15 monitoring wells. Many of them were abandoned drinking water wells that we turned into sampling points. Some are monitoring wells at the Water Street and Northside Drive facility. And we'll be sampling those until we're confident that the groundwater in Bennington is clean, at which point I guess we'll investigate removing the Class 4 designation. Don't know how long that's going to take. So that's where we came from, what we've done, and what we plan on doing. And I don't know if we want to take questions or move on to John. And thanks for listening.
I know, Chuck, is there anybody have their hands raised?
No.
I've got a question. It's Mary Morrissey on the phone.
Go ahead, Mary.
Okay. You had just mentioned something about some recent sampling that people have requested. Is that being done as repeat sampling, or is this some other different sampling?
No, Mary, there's only been a couple of cases recently, but we're still amazed that there are unbelievably residences in Bennington who, for whatever reason, had not requested sampling of the agency that are inside the colored areas here that are our area of concern. And in those cases, the agreement says that Saint-Gobain will sample those wells to see if they're contaminated. And if they are, that will evaluate what's the best solution for mitigating that contamination. Is it connecting to municipal water lines? Is it putting permanent treatment on, or drilling new wells? Each of those will be evaluated, but they are required immediately to provide bottled drinking water and put a treatment system on until that evaluation is complete. John, anything you want to add?
No, I think
have
that's
those-
good.
Have those samples been, or have they been, I guess what I want to say is, did they prove positive, or has the testing not come back yet?
You know, John, you're probably going to have to help me on this one. I'm thinking that none of them came back above standards that I can think of.
Right now, none of them have gone above standards except the one that resulted in us expanding the reclass a little bit from the boundaries, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But Representative, we got 2 requests within the last few days. So I think when people got the notification from us about the reclass, some of them have never requested their well to be sampled. So I think that's what prompted them to get the sample. So we haven't sampled those wells yet.
Okay, and one last quick question. Should they decide that they want to, if the numbers are weird, they just want to go on to the town, be connected to the town water, is that a fairly easy process or not?
It's not terribly easy, but it's not terribly difficult. They actually have a process they call wet tap into the main water lines, so they can actually tap into the water line even while it's producing water. And then obviously they have to dig a trench and connect it with the right size line. So there is some engineering involved and some excavation work involved. But certainly if that makes sense, that will be the preferable alternative that we would try and convince people to do. But in the end, it's their choice. And if that doesn't make sense, then we would fall back on possibly drilling a new well with better specifications, which John will talk about later, or just keeping a treatment system on indefinitely.
Thank you so much.
Mary, were you referring to the wells that haven't been sampled yet? What would happen with them, or just in general?
Right. That was more or less what I was, referring to. If that would be, being that so many had already gone on or been connected to the town line, and I just wondered if that was a major project to do. And it sounds like it's not that bad, but yes, it is a little complicated.
Yeah, it is the same process we used on those 13 homes I mentioned that we connected in 20 homes and businesses that we connected in 2016. That's the exact same process that they used then. The lines were existing and operating through the whole process.
Great. Again, thank you so much.
Chuck, we have a hand up.
We don't. Oh,
Al and Nancy.
oh, we do. I'm sorry about that. I did not see that. Please,
Hi.
Al and Nancy.
Hi there. First, we want to thank you for your responsiveness to the community in terms of this whole issue, and we're quite impressed with all the trips that you've taken down here and the work that you've done to help us out. I think we're entering a more difficult stage right now, and that has to do with the reclassification. So my question is, Richard, I heard you mention removing the Class 4 designation. How might that happen?
Well, if you don't mind, Al, and maybe this is punting, but let's let John give the talk about how we get it on. And
Okay.
I'm not even sure if in his talk he has something on there about how to take it off. But if he doesn't, we'll make sure to catch that at the end of his talk.
Okay.
I do have
Yeah,
something.
thought you might.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Great, and thank you for your kind words, Al. All right, John, take us away.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible. But I'm going to talk about the groundwater reclassification, and you can see my bullet points there. I'm going to say, why do we need to reclassify the water? I mean, the groundwater. How do we determine the boundaries? And then I'm going to talk about the finding of facts and the reclassification order. And what that does is that kind of identifies what the reclassification is going to mean, and it's very specific to new wells. Think of what Richard talked about. We were focusing on making sure people weren't drinking contaminated water existing wells. So we looked at putting in connecting people to water where we could, to town water. And in cases where we can't, we put the treatment systems on, and now we're looking at replacement wells. Where I look, what reclassification is going to do, it's going to ensure that we have some type of institutional control in place for future wells. So when future wells get drilled, we want to make sure that people are aware of the fact that it may be contaminated, and there's measures in place to try to ensure people are drinking clean water. And the other thing I will talk about is, what does this reclassification not change? And I will, I'll be a spoiler to my own slides coming up. I received a number of questions from people about how does this affect my existing well? And I want to say it does not affect existing uses of wells. So even though this is going to be reclassified, it's not going to affect your uses of your well. And if you sell your property, it's not going to affect the use of that well. And then I'm going to discuss Saint-Gobain's obligations, how the settlement agreement works, and what their obligations are relative to existing wells, but also new wells. And it gets a little complicated. There's going to be some areas where they do have obligations, and there's others where they won't. And I'll talk about that during this discussion. And then I'll provide a summary, and then talk about next steps in the reclassification process. So why is the groundwater being reclassified? The major reason is we want to publicly notify that there's contamination. I know that most people, you've been living this for 5 years. We've been involved, and I think a lot of people have a general knowledge of this, but we want to make sure that there is a formal notification of this contamination. Given what Richard said, there is really no practical way of removing that water in a short period of time. And based on our requirements in our regulatory rules, and also in statute, that if we expect contamination to persist over 5 years, we need to provide documentation through the groundwater reclassification process. And then the practical side of it is, we wanted to protect human health and safety by providing a formal notification to the landowners. And that's why we're going through this process right now. And probably the one group that really needs to know this is well drillers, as well as the permitting agencies that groundwater is, or that groundwater may be contaminated or is contaminated with PFAS. And as I discussed, I just mentioned about that it's just not feasible to clean up the site. And then also Bar Engineer, on behalf of Saint-Gobain, they submitted a reclassification petition to us. Now, they were required to do that through the settlement agreement and our approved corrective action plans. And the reason why they needed to do that was because we knew that groundwater contamination was going to persist over that 5-year period. And then talking about how do we come up with the boundaries, it is fairly consistent with the corrective action boundaries, with one addition, and I'll explain that when I bring up the map. And then all that information that Richard talked about, with the collection of the data that Bar collected, the information, that supplemental information that we obtained. And also we hired a contractor out of Portland, Maine, that had experience with PFAS, and they helped us review the documents and the reports from Bar to make sure there wasn't anything that we were missing. And then also, Richard said 600 is his comfort number for the number of wells. I'm comfortable with saying 650, but Richard's right. That number changes because we are still getting requests. But based on all that information that we receive in the wells, that's how we define where the boundaries were for the reclass. And you can see that darker color blue in the upper right-hand corner. that was an additional parcel that was added due to some recent sampling results. But that's the only difference currently with what between this boundary and what the boundary was that was in the final settlement agreement in 2019. And then this is another example of all the wells that we collected and that helped us define the boundary. And I know you see the irregular lines, and the reason why we did that, we based that on parcels. And so if a parcel had a contamination in it, we would include that whole entire parcel. So based on all that information that we obtained and we talked about, that Richard talked about, and the petition, we were able to draft some findings of facts that are in that decision document that accompanied the petition. And the ones I really want to focus on, some of them we already touched on, and I think the ones I really want to touch on is the bullet 3 and the last bullet. On the third bullet, it talks about, we know this contamination is everywhere. And I know some people might argue, it's like, wait a minute, my well is clean. Why am I within the reclass area? And it's because we know of how this contaminant spread, that it's everywhere in the soils. And I think that the reason why your well may be clean is goes back to what Richard said, is that your well was constructed in such a way that you're probably tapping into the deeper aquifer that isn't contaminated, where there is a good chance that, and a high probability that the shallow aquifer is. So that's why, even though there's some wells that are within the area that are clean, that's why they're included into the area. And then the final bullet that I have here is connection to municipal water is our preferred remedy. But because of the size of this reclassification area, and I want to back up a little bit, I think when the legislators and also our agency and department were thinking about reclassification, I don't think we were thinking about reclassifying a whole entire town. And I think so that is a challenge, and we recognize that. And so recognizing the fact that there are some areas that if people want to develop their parcels, they're not going to be able to connect to town water, and we're going to need and they're going to need to drill a well. So recognizing those facts, we took that into account when we're coming up with this reclassification order. And so what this draft reclassification order is proposing is that it will allow the drilling of newly permitted wells, including replacement wells, for the entire area outside 200 feet of an existing water line. And however, within 200 feet, we're going to prohibit people from drilling wells unless there is extenuating circumstances where it's just technically impractical for them to connect to the town water. We're not expecting that to be an issue, but we wanted to give that flexibility, to make sure that there is a way of doing that if it needs to happen. And in those conditions, in order to drill a well, we've got well construction requirements, initial testing requirements to see if you got contamination, a long-term monitoring plan, and treatment requirements. Those last 3 bullets are all that if you're in the area that Richard identified as Operation Unit B, in those areas, Saint-Gobain is going to be responsible to perform those tasks. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. With the well construction, that is the responsibility of the permittee. And I have a slide that will talk a little bit more about the well construction requirements. In addition, what the draft order does, it prohibits the use of overburdened wells, springs, and shallows as a new potable public water system. I want to be really clear, this does not affect existing water sources. And the reason why we want to prohibit that shallow aquifer is based on what that we know from all the investigations that shallow aquifer is likely contaminated. And then the other two measures with respects to non-potable wells. So for wells that are used for industrial, commercial, or geothermal, our division, or the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, will need to be notified. And we're going to look at those on a case-by-case basis, because what we don't want is new wells being installed that could potentially exacerbate the contamination within the area. And then in addition to that, there's a provision where if anybody wants to use a new water supply for an agricultural use, then they need to notify the Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Market. And these orders are going to be very clear to well drillers. So any well driller that's hired in this area, they need to be aware of this, and they should be aware of this, because we will be sending them this notification. And then the final bullet gets to what you're talking about, Al, is that there is going to be long-term monitoring that's going to be required under the consent order, and based on those results, we are going to assess the future adjustments to this reclassification area. Hopefully, it's not going to be expanded. We'll look at maybe contraction or potentially reclassify the water back to class 3. So, I mean, and that's primarily based on what the sampling results are. And again, the reason why this groundwater was reclassified is because the levels are above the standard for PFAS. And once we are getting results that show that's not the case, then we would start the process to reclassify the groundwater. Based on what we're seeing in the next 5 years and what the predictions are, I'll be honest, I don't see that happening in the next 5 to 10 years. I hope I'm wrong, but I would be very surprised if we're going to be able to change the reclassification based on improvement in groundwater to that degree. Richard or Chuck, do you guys want to add to that, or do you think that's fair?
I'll add to it, just that I think it's totally fair. And the other thing will be, I don't think we plan on reclassifying parcel by parcel. We're hoping to do it maybe neighborhood by neighborhood, as we get enough information in an area where we can collapse a whole area where it makes sense, and not, because one of the things we've talked about now is the uncertainty on how groundwater moves, and how, even though we understand this groundwater movement better than many areas where it's in bedrock, it's still, there's a lot of uncertainty associated with it. So
yeah, I think that's
John.
fair, Richard. I think that is how we would look at it. It would be looking more at areas than it would be parcel by parcel. I think that's fair. So here's the reclassification map, and on there is the existing water lines. So, this kind of gives people a sense. Like, again, if you're within 200 feet of the existing water line, then you would be required to connect to that water line unless there are extenuating circumstances that don't allow you to connect. And then for all the other areas, you would need to follow the restrictions that I outlined in my previous slide. So the well construction requirements. First, I want to qualify my little cartoon here. I got it from the state of Maine, and I figured when you talk about well construction, people are going to visualize it. So I wanted to make sure I had a cartoon there. But the one thing that's a little bit different from what I'm describing in the text versus in the cartoon is that the cartoon doesn't show the grout around the casing. Where what we're looking to do for our requirements for well construction is, again, we want to try to prevent that shallow groundwater from impacting the well. So we're requiring the casing depth to be at least 50 feet below competent bedrock, and then also to over drill the have your boring be at least so you got 4 inches of space that is in between the bore, or let me say that again. Let me say it a little better. That the borehole diameter needs to be 4 inches greater than the diameter of the casing. So there's enough space around the casing to put in the grout and get a good seal. But also, we also recognize, and I know at least one person that's on the call that lives in an area where, for lack of a better term, Ochreville, and you have the ochre and there's not really competent bedrock. So, but also we know that there's wells in that area that have been cleaned. So we are going to have site-specific variants on some of those areas where this standard can't be met, and try to come up with something that still achieves our objective, which is to diminish that communication of that shallow groundwater into the well. So what doesn't change? I alluded to these a little bit, but I want to say them again. They don't affect the use of existing wells. They don't affect the ability for a new property owner to use an existing well. And it doesn't affect or change at all what Saint-Gobain's obligations are under the contract, under the settlement agreement. So this is out of the petition, and it shows the different operable units. Like Richard was talking about, the A, B, and C. I have to say I don't like their choice of colors, with the exception of that one additional parcel in the northeast. I'm going to go back to this map that is essentially shows the same thing for the operable units. I just think it's easier to see, and again, the operable units A and C are the purple, the blue, and the yellow. And the operable units B, which is the areas where we weren't able to put water lines in, that is in the green. So I think, let's see, anything else I want to add about that? Richard, you want to add anything there, or are you good? Okay.
We're good.
So I want to get to Saint-Gobain's obligations. And I'm going to start with operable units A and C, and that's where we put in the water lines. So I'm going to go back to the map again, and basically Saint-Gobain committed to any existing property could get connected within the areas of the blue and the purple and the light purple. The yellow was areas that the state were the lead on, and it was the exact same thing. Anybody that wanted to get connected, we would connect them. And so we recognize that some of these parcels are fairly large. And so there may be instances where it may not be practical in these areas to connect. So for those areas, if someone chooses to not connect, then we're going to allow them to drill the well, but then they are going to be obligated to do all the requirements to ensure that well is clean. They're going to have to have the well tested, and then also if it is contaminated, then maintain a treatment system. For operable unit B, those are areas again where it was determined that we couldn't put water lines in. In those areas, Saint-Gobain is obligated to do the long-term monitoring of existing wells and also any newly permitted well. And then also, if there is contamination from the long-term monitoring or from the initial testing, they have to provide a short-term remedy initially, which is bottled water, and then a long-term remedy, which would be a POET system, and then looking at alternative, like a replacement well at that new location, just like we're doing now for the 20 wells on the east side. And how many wells on the west side, Richard? 13?
13.
Yeah. And assess and implement alternative long-term drinking water remedy, like I just talked about. And then also what they have to do is every year they have to provide the annual report. And this touches on a little bit on your question, Alan, is how are we going to know if there's a change in the groundwater. And we're going to be getting these results every year and evaluating those results and seeing how things are changing.
Hey, John, just a quick thing. We're going to get the results sooner than every year. We'll get them shortly after the results come in, and we'll send them out to the homeowners, but then they'll summarize all those results
Right.
so that
No,
we can make sense of the data.
No, you are correct. You're correct. In terms of putting all the information so we can look at it as one unit and see and look at trends over time. No, you're right. So in summary, what this reclassification order will do, it prohibits new drinking water wells within 200 feet with some allowances. It specifies the conditions in which new bedrock wells can be installed. And replacement wells will require a new permit. It prohibits the use of overburden wells and springs, and then requires notification for non-potable uses for industrial and commercial and geothermal. That would have to go through DEC. It would be through our division, probably through Richard and I. And any type of agricultural well needs to go through the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Oh, I hope I did that right. We do have some representatives from the Agency of Ag that I believe are on the call. And after I'm done here, in fact, I'll let them have an opportunity to talk now if there's something that you'd like to say to correct me. Anybody? Carrie, Linda, Patty?
Hi, John. This is Linda. Is Carrie there?
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yep. No, John, I have nothing to add to your slide at all.
Okay.
You're doing great.
Nope. I just wanted to make sure that people knew that that the Agency of Ag understands that this this can have a huge impact on the people of Bennington.
We do.
And are ready to answer questions that they may have concerning agricultural wells. And then finally, the well drillers are notification about the reclass and placing that in our atlas. So when people look at our atlas, they'll be able to see where areas where groundwater is reclassified. And the next steps is we're going to review comments and questions on the proposed reclass and the draft decision. The A&R secretary will issue a final decision whether to go forward with the reclassification or not. And in that final decision, we will provide a response to public comments through the Environmental Notice Board. The final decision will include a final reclassification order if applicable. And then I already talked about that last bullet is notification of licensed drillers if the groundwater is reclassified.
Hey, John, can I add one thing? Oh,
yes.
Never mind. Looks like you're about to cover it.
And for more information, you can go to our website. I think that's where most of you receive a lot of the information. We have the petition and other supporting documentation. We pretty much have every single document that we use to make this decision and also use to make decisions relative to the settlement agreement. We have the settlement agreements on the website as well. We have the draft decision, including a proposed reclassification order, links to the Environmental Notice Board, how to get on there, and then also a fact sheet and FAQs. For people that aren't able to access the internet, we put a copy of the reclassification documents at the town offices, and they asked to give them a call to set up an appointment. They'll have a room reserved for you, but they appreciate the call so they can set that up. And informal comments on the reclassification can be made through the Environmental Notice Board, or you can send them to me or Richard. And as always, if you have questions, always feel free to give Richard and me a call.
And John, what's the time frame for public comments?
Oh, I'm sorry. The public comment period is currently it plans to end on March 19th.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Richard. Yeah, great if you want to close your presentation, John, so we can see each other better.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll take questions, and I see Al and Nancy, you have your hand up. I didn't miss it this time, so please go ahead and ask the first question.
Hi, this is Nancy from Al and Nancy this time. The town water came, I think three houses down our neighborhood only, and then stopped. And so what I'm wondering is, the rest of us were not offered the option to connect to town water. So I'm wondering if this change in classification to non-potable water will then mean that this will open up so that we will then be offered the option to connect to town water, and those lines will be extended since our water will be classified as class 4.
Well, to be clear, those people's water where they are getting connected are also classified as class 4. So
Yeah.
To answer your question is that the reason why that area wasn't extended down Settlers Road is because for two reasons. One, probably the major reason is that unfortunately most of those homes along Settlers Road are clean.
Right.
And in our discussions with Saint-Gobain and trying to negotiate them, that they felt like that was something they weren't willing to do because those homes are either clean or the wells are at a point that would likely get below the standard. But again, I want to be clear, this does not prevent you from using your well at all.
Right. I guess that gets to the root of my question. You just said our wells are clean, which I agree with. And again, like Al said, I totally appreciate everything you guys have done. Our wells are clean. Our water is being classified as not clean. Or am I misconstruing?
John, can I take a shot at this? Because I actually had this question the other day, and I just had a talk from a professor in Middlebury College.
Go forth.
Who worked with our state geologist a lot about this. I think we mentioned, and John mentioned it in his presentation, that if you drilled a shallow well anywhere around your property, you almost certainly would find contaminated water. And we know that for several reasons. One is the nature of how the PFAS is moving, but even more importantly, as part of the conceptual site model, when Bar Engineering and their CT Mail, who were working for Saint-Gobain, drilled a boring not far from Settlers, they found contaminated groundwater in shallow groundwater. And unfortunately, when we do class 4 designations, we only do it in 2 dimensions. We don't do it in that 3rd dimension. So there is contaminated groundwater almost certainly under your property, but it's in the shallow water table. And the reason that your wells have not become contaminated is that you're actually sitting on an old ancient fault line. And the water that's coming up that fault line almost certainly is coming from way up in the Green Mountains. So it may be in an area where it's never gotten contaminated, but certainly very old groundwater, more than 60 years old, probably more than hundreds of years old. And so it's not likely to become contaminated anytime soon or ever, but you still have contaminated groundwater under your property. And it's kind of one of those difficult issues with trying to map something in 2 dimensions when we live in a 3-dimensional world. So,
and I want to clarify for everybody, I don't think 60 years is old, by the way.
Yeah.
I agree.
So does
Thank
that
you,
mean
John.
that our neighborhood might be considered as a future, to be declassified in the future or reclassified or whatever the expression is?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be based on the data that we have. Like we use the information that we're going to get from the long-term monitoring of the drinking water wells, but also, as Richard mentioned, we have some other wells within the areas that we're using for long-term monitoring, and we're going to use that information as well and assess to see if there are certain areas that we might be able to take out of the reclassification area.
And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would mean both the shallow and deep aquifers are clean.
That is correct.
Right.
That is correct.
So it is kind of one of those good news, bad news answers. I mean, your well's not contaminated. It's not likely to become contaminated. We're obviously going to continue to sample it. But unfortunately, because of the atmospheric deposition and how the PFOA got onto the soils and how water leaches through those soils and goes to the shallow water table, it's almost, there is, as I said, a well not far from your home, a shallow well that's contaminated. And if we put one right on your property, it almost certainly would have, levels of PFOA in it as well.
We've had a few wells that, or properties that had more than one well on their property, a shallow well and a deep well. And their deep well's been clean and the shallow well has been contaminated. Or
we have another location where the deep well is clean, but there's a spring on the property and it's also contaminated. So, again, it's a line of evidence. There's a lot of evidence that supports that. It'd be difficult to put I don't know, how many properties did we send this notice out to, John? 2,900 or something?
2,500.
2,500. To put 2,500 wells, one on each property, it would be very problematic. So we extrapolate between sampling points, and unfortunately, that's the conclusion that we've come to.
And this was a challenge, and we recognize this, and that is why we wanted to make sure that we had provisions that allow people to drill. At one time, when you reclassified groundwater, there wasn't even an option to drill a new well. But I think we recognized that that wasn't going to work here in Bennington. And again, we were trying to balance the notification. We don't want people drinking bad water, but we also know that it's got to be practical for a lot of these parcels where we can't connect them to town water.
I'm looking for other hands of questions. I'm not seeing it. Anyone on the phone? Do you have a question you'd like to ask?
No, I would just like to say this is Representative Morrissey again. I can't thank you enough for the 5 years of the incredible work you have done for this community and for those who have been affected, and you're still doing it. And you're all amazing, and you've worked with your partners such as agriculture and other departments across the board, and I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Representative Morrissey. We really appreciate that. And again, Richard and John have been the workhorses by far. They've put in thousands of hours into this project. Anyone else?
I could add, Chuck, that John put a lot of work into the reclassification webpage on our agency webpage, and he tried to anticipate a lot of the questions that might come up. So if you think of another question between now and the end, or even after of the open comment period, there is a multi-page question and answer document on there that may answer your question. Or as John said, you can always just email us or call us. But sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
I see one flashing a BH. It seems like, did you want to say something? Did you see that?
I do see Alan. Nancy, you have your hand up again. By all means, please. That's why we're here. Ask away.
Okay. I guess we have a lot of questions. That's this little bin. It's all full of questions. We'll be here till about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock.
That sounds good. We'll be here with you.
Okay.
So you weren't kidding that what you brought in there was all your questions.
Again, we appreciate the work that you all have done. You sent out many notices, and I'm pretty disappointed that there's not a whole lot of people that are on this. This has a profound impact on the property owners throughout Bennington. And I don't know what the answer to this is. And I don't know if it's in your court, but it's something to consider as you're creating the reclassification is, are all the people that are affected by this aware that this is going to happen? And is there, is it important for perhaps the state and others to try a little harder to reach out to make sure that people really do understand the ramifications of this reclassification? that's looking at it from a community organizing perspective, not necessarily as a hydrologist or the kind of work that you do.
I'll just quickly say, and John, I'll let you follow up. I think it's a really great point. We want to reach everyone. We want people to be aware of this step we're taking as part of the corrective action process. But I mean, with the 2,500 postcards that were sent out, with this public meeting, with the website, with the environmental notice bulletin, I'm not sure we're aware of much more we can do. And I think the pandemic has certainly affected us, because if not for the pandemic, Richard and John would be down there knocking on doors. So, that has certainly, made it more challenging for us. But, we absolutely want people to be aware of this step. But it is really important. I mean, the biggest thing from our perspective, yes, it is a law that we have to follow, but we feel it makes sense. We don't want people to unknowingly drill a well and drink and be exposed to contaminated water. And we don't want people to drill a well into a highly contaminated area and spread it into surface waters or in their neighbor's yard or things like that. And yet at the same time, as John indicated, we put provisions in the order to allow for other uses, to allow for drilling of well when there's no other good options. So we recognize the importance of reclass, but we also recognize the real world implications. So I know that's a long way to answer your question, but we're doing our best. Go ahead, John.
And one thing I want to add to that is that the one thing that this reclassification does, in reality, last 5 years, it's been the same issue. The groundwater's been contaminated, and many people, realtors, have asked, well, what do we do? What do we do? And I can say with regards to the reclass, now there's a formalized criteria in place that what if I want to drill a new well? Now it's clear. Where in this up until now, it hasn't been as clear. So I think in one respect that could help people provide clarity, because even the fact that we're putting a formal notice on this doesn't change the fact that the water is contaminated.
Yeah. So just one area that is missing as far as reaching out to people. I've never seen anything. I haven't seen anything recently in the media about this, and I don't know if you consider sending something out. I don't know, what would come back at you or whatever. But I've talked to a lot of people, and most people weren't aware that this was going on, even though they got the postcards and other things.
Hey, you stole my thunder. If you didn't ask, I was going to mention it. We actually spoke with reporter Theron from the Bennington Banner yesterday. So I will do a shout out for the Free Press. They probably need it in this world today. And he really wanted to be at this meeting, but had a conflicting meeting, and asked if we were recording the meeting so that he could watch it. And we are, and we're going to put it up on our webpage, and he's going to watch it tomorrow. And I suspect, I can't speak for the Banner. They obviously do what they want, but I suspect the reason that he wants to watch it is so that he can write an article to put in the Banner. And then we'll still be taking formal comments. We'll still take informal comments or question and answer. So, if people read the paper and didn't know about it, they'll still have an opportunity before it's all over, I think. John, something you want to add?
Well, no, you stole my thunder, Richard, but that was all right. And the other thing too is we sent out a community update, and that went to all the local press as well. So we did make sure that we got that information to them.
And 950 other people in the greater Bennington area.
Right. And the other thing too is we do have our deadline of March 19th. But I think if we do get a number of comments that saying that people want more time, I think that's something we would strongly consider.
Yeah,
so
definitely. I see Scott, you have your hand up.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, just a question in regards to real estate transactions that'll happen in this class 4 area. Will there actually be some document that needs to be handled during a property transfer that lets new owners know about the class, the groundwater classification?
I'll take a stab at that, Scott. Right now, there's nothing formal with regards to the reclass to provide that information. The way the rule is written is that we provide that to the drillers. I will tell you that we will send copies of this to the Real Estate Association as well as the Regional Planning Commission and the towns as well. With regards to disclosure notices, I would defer to your attorney about what would be required in that regard. I wish I could give you a better answer than that right now. I know that that's one of your formal questions, and that's something that we will definitely provide a concrete response to that in our responsive summary.
Yeah, I know I put it in my formal question, similar to that, where we have to have lead paint disclosures when we sell our property. I would think that a class 4 groundwater classification would also be one of those types of notices. So I don't know, Mary, I know you're on the call, if that would be ever something that the legislators would consider.
Okay, and I'll jot that down. So how would, so that would be something that would have to be put on, like if you were selling the property, that it would say that it is a class 4?
Something like that is what I would envision.
Okay.
Hey, Scott, in our answer, we'll check with our attorneys, but there
Right,
may
so
already be a realty law that says that realtors have to disclose any issues with properties that they know about. And if we find that's true, we'll reference the statute where it says that. But I have been to several talks where realtors say about hazardous waste sites, disclose, disclose, disclose. It's very important for them so they don't accept any liability for any issues. Now, I'm not sure what would happen in a private sale, but we'll look into that as far as, what's existing state law may apply to that in our response to your question.
Could I
Thank you.
Could I ask that once you do speak with your attorneys, that you can email me with that information, so if there is something lacking or something we should have, you can, through your attorneys, advise what type of language would be important? Is that
Yes, Mary,
possible?
we can definitely circle back to you to make sure you're aware of it.
Okay, and
Right.
because then I could make sure that, the committees of jurisdiction that need to, we could possibly do something to get it onto a piece of legislation, being important. So we'll go from there. I'll wait to hear back from you.
Okay.
Yeah, and Scott, I would say I know there are disclosure laws, but like Richard, I do not understand them or know what they are. So, but we'll try to give you better clarity in our formal response.
And we can commit to getting you something, Scott and Mary, before the 19th of March.
Thank you so much.
The current day.
Any other questions out there?
Al, did you have some more?
Where did you get your outfit?
You talking to me?
Yeah.
Oh, you're his background, right? You're talking about a
have my
spaceman?
outfit of flavor. It's a flannel shirt. The background you can put on through the software.
Yeah, I was very nice. Very impressive.
Well, I want to thank everybody for your time, and I know that this it's been a long 5 years. Even though sometimes I look back and go, "Wow, it's been 5 years," but I know it's been longer and harder for you. And again, if there's any questions that you have, anytime, give us a call.
And Al, I would say if you think of a way we can reach out differently to more folks in the affected area, just let us know. If there's anything else we can do to try to make sure people really understand and are aware of this reclassification, we're willing to do that for sure.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'll email when I come up with some ideas.
Okay.
Sounds good. We'll
Thank you
stay
so
we'll
much.
stay on a few more minutes in case anyone has a last minute question. We do have the Agency of Agriculture on, so if you want to know about any of their upcoming rules, I'm sure Carrie would love to go over them.
Wow.
Great presentation, John and Richard. Thank you. And thanks for the invitation, Chuck.
You're welcome. And I'm sure you're aware, but John will make sure this presentation is uploaded to our website as well. So if you want to go back and see any of the details in the slides, sometimes it's easier to see it on your own computer at your own time, but that will be made available too. Well, John will try to get that up relatively quickly.
Tomorrow is my goal.
Tomorrow, I think.
And if I'm smart enough, I'm going to try to get the recording up tomorrow too.
Very good.
We'll see how that goes.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this Thursday evening. Much appreciated your time, your questions, your attention, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon.
Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.